What is going on, guys? My name is Tim Roswick, and today we're talking about game design concepts. And there are a lot of different concepts in game design. There's way more than I can ever cover in a lifetime. So I thought we'd explore each individual concept that comes up in my life, or comes up in my game design, or just something I want to share with you guys in a kind of like segment, I guess, a video that talks about game design concepts. So the first one I want to talk about is the play session and the session length of that play session. And I want to talk about what it is, why it's important, and why you should care. So a play session is when someone sits down and plays your game. It sounds super simple, right? So why does that matter? Well, different play sessions happen in different places. For example, if you're on a mobile device and you're playing a game, your play session might take place in a completely different place than a PC game will. And same thing with a console game. PC games happen at computers. A lot of people work and play on the same computer. Console games are usually in living rooms, right? On a couch. A lot of times there's a wife or children around hanging out too. Mobile games can take place on the bus or on the train or in a taxi or at your friend's house or at a party you feel like you want to leave because you have social anxiety. Whatever it is, the play session of your game is important. But specifically what I want to talk about is the play session length, the length of time that a certain play session is. Because this is something that comes up in a lot of games that I see that sometimes are really fun, excuse me, but they get the play session wrong, so they either seem long and drawn out or they seem unfun because they're not long enough. And it's really important to know because this is something I've implemented in my games from the beginning. And I use difficulty to kind of curve the play session. So for a lot of my mobile games, what I aim for when I design the game, when I start designing the game, I think of a certain length of time. And everything that I do around that game, everything that I design, everything I add into that game, whether it's difficulty or guns or power-ups or whatever, it's all put into that game with a certain design length in mind. So for my game Ascension, which I had to change the name to Impossible Climb because you can't find it when you search Ascension, so it's now called Impossible Climb. That game's play session, its ideal play session, what I designed it for, is 2 minutes. That's how long you're supposed to play the game before you die. That's not how long most people play the game. Some people last 30 seconds. Some people last 4 minutes. But I designed a 2-minute play session. And everything that I designed around that game, from the difficulty to the scoring to the enemies to how the phases work, like the farther you get, the more shit falls down and tries to stop you from climbing higher. All of that is designed around that play session length of 2 minutes. And the reason why I did that is because it's a mobile game. And where do mobile games get played a lot? They get played in places where you may not have a whole lot of time. They get played on the bus, on the train, in line, all these different places. That's where these simple little casual games that I make get played a lot. I know that, and I know the length of time that they're going to play my game is going to be a lot shorter than the length of time they might play something like Civilization, for example, which has a very long play session time. That game is ridiculous. I can't even play that game, for example, because the play session time in Civilization is just too long for me. I can't sit there for 4 to 8 hours and play a whole playthrough of that game. I know there are quicker options, but you know, that's a base game. So keeping the play session length in mind while you design a game is really effective, and it's a great way to design a good contextual game for whatever you design it for. In the startup world, we would call something like this a use case, where you define a specific case where someone's going to use the product, or how they're going to use it, or what they're going to do with it. In game development, I feel like you need to understand the context of not only who you're targeting, right? Like who's going to play this game, but where are they going to play this game? And how are they going to play this game? Those things are really important. And most people, they just make games and then whatever they come up with, they have a game. That can work sometimes, right? Like, especially if you know what you want, like if you're making the game that you want to play, yeah, you can end up with a good game and you can kind of design that play session length around something that you love, or a game similar to yours, which a lot of people do too. And that's fine. But I like to actually come up with a number for my length. So for Phylophobia, for example, that game is broken into levels, and these levels are all on a single screen. Every level is on a single screen, except for some boss fights, which I'm not going to talk about. But generally, all of those levels are designed to be right around 5 to 8 minutes. And if you're speed running, if you're just running through the level, if you're just and you, like me, where I know all the obstacles are, I can beat the level in between probably some of the longer ones, maybe 2.5 minutes. Some of the shorter ones, maybe a minute, because I know where everything is. But that 5 to 8 minutes is designed for newer players that are going through. They're discovering all the traps, right? And they're dying each time they discover a trap, because that's kind of how my game works. Is you walk around a corner, something kills you, you know not to walk around that corner anymore, or at least be more cautious next time you do. So that initial play session is designed to be a certain amount of time of length. In fact, when I sent out the previous build to my testers, I told the testers specifically, if any level takes you more than 5 or 10 minutes, skip it. Don't keep trying to beat it. Skip it, because that level either needs to be cut or it needs to be tuned, because that is what I'm designing the entire game around. And the way that I do this in this game specifically is with difficulty. So if I can get to a level 2 quick, it probably needs to be harder. Like there needs to be more hidden shit that eats you or falls on you or chases you or whatever. Sometimes I do it with hidden mechanics. Sometimes I do it with, in the later levels, I actually do it with enemy types that force you to wait. Like there's a certain enemy type that just goes around one of the blocks, right? So if you come in at the wrong time, you have to wait for him to complete his cycle before you can jump on the platform and continue. And there's a lot of little tricks that I do like that with the play session length in mind. So now you're thinking, why would this actually be important? I've explained, how people play, and I've explained that I design specific times for specific devices and specific games play session. But why should you actually do that? Like, why is that important? I feel like it's important from a lot of different fronts, but I'll talk just a few examples and I'll go in specifics. The first one I think is consistency across your game. Whatever it is, people are going to play it. And if they're going to play it with a certain amount of time in mind, they want to have that core experience or whatever. I know that a lot of people play FTL, and they know that every time I sit down for FTL, it's going to be a good hour experience, unless they die early to something crazy. They're going to sit down, they're going to do a playthrough, and it's going to be great. And they know what to expect from that. If your level design is all over the place, the game feels really inconsistent, and it comes off as like, a lot of times you can't pinpoint that it's the length, right? But it just feels unbalanced. It feels, this part feels too easy, this part feels too hard. And a lot of times players can't put that into words. So they'll say different things, and really what they're talking about are just symptoms of the problem of the play session. But two, I think it helps you make a better game, because when you design an optimal play session for a device or for a game, it encourages you to repeat that cycle, right? That's what most people would call the game loop. And you want to repeat that game loop throughout the game, make different iterations on it, make different changes on it. But that's the core experience that at least in my game, the Phylophobia game, that 5 to 8 minute level is that core experience loop. Like that's the loop that they go through over and over and over again as they progress through the game. And, it changes. It gets more difficult, less difficult. It goes, in cycles. And there are things to switch it up along the way. And, there are different power-ups and there are different things that you can do. But generally, that same experience is happening over and over and over and over and over again, because I've specifically designed it that way. Now, with that in mind, there are certain levels, like the boss levels, that take longer, and they're designed to take longer specifically because those levels are designed to stand out. Those levels should feel differently. And so I'm not saying this is a general rule that you always want to have a play session time in mind. You always want to keep it consistent across all your levels. But it's just something to be aware of. And when you're designing a game, you should always be aware of what the average play session length is. I like to design it, but even if you don't design it into the game, make sure you do enough testing, do enough feedback to where you at least know what the session is. So if you're encountering problems where people say the game's too slow, or I don't like it, or the end game's bad, or whatever it is, you can look into play session length as maybe one of the problems that you have. So that's all I've got to say on the subject. I hope you guys found it useful. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment down below. If you have any questions on this, I'd be happy to answer them as well. Once again, I'm Tim Ruswick, and I will see you again tomorrow.